Tonight's notes are titled Living and Working in Virginia. So up to this point, we've been discussing the start of the Virginia colony at Jamestown, and we learned how the colony after 1610 began to grow. Not only did Jamestown itself start to grow, but the English settlers started to spread out, sail up the James River, start to establish new settlements, and within about 10 years had between 20 and 25 separate settlements starting to spread out in Virginia. So with this set of notes, we're going to talk a little bit about just broadly talking about life and work in the early years of the Virginia colony. So we know that the earliest settlers came over in 1607 primarily motivated by money. They came to make money. They came looking for gold and silver, but they couldn't find it. There's not a lot of gold and silver in Virginia anyway, and the gold and silver that is here is not lying along the coast or along the James River, so they didn't find anything. Because they weren't really well prepared, they really struggled. They struggled to grow crops. They had some rough interactions with the natives, and things got so bad in those first couple of years that the winter of 1609 to 1610 got the nickname the Starving Time. Only 60 settlers out of the nearly 900 that had come to that point actually made it through the Starving Time. But in the spring of 1610, new ships come in. On those ships is a settler by the name of John Rolfe. And John Rolfe has with him a very, very important seed. And they are tobacco seeds. Not really 100% sure how he got those, since the Spanish had a monopoly on the seeds and were not real big on sharing them. But either way, Rolfe ends up with the seeds. And as they start to grow, the Jamestown settlers, the Virginia settlers, begin to realize that the wealth that they're looking for is not going to come from gold and silver, but it's going to come from the soil. The wealth is going to be tobacco, right? Tobacco is a cash crop, meaning it's sold, in other places. It's not grown to be eaten; it's grown to be sold, and that this could be a way for them to make the money that they were hoping to make. Virginia has really an almost perfect setup for growing tobacco. It's the right kind of soil, it's the right climate, kind of a warm, humid climate. Tobacco takes a long time to grow. The process takes 4 to 6 months, and you're able to do that in a place like Virginia, which has fairly mild winters and nice warm summers. Tobacco is labor intensive. It takes a lot of steps. So we've briefly talked about this before, where you have to first plant it in seed beds to get the sprouts going. Then you're going to transplant it to another field and spread them out so they have room to grow. You don't want the flowers, you want the leaves. So as flowers start to bloom, you have to go and remove the flowers. Then, as you harvest it, the leaves have to be dried out for another 6 to 10 weeks. On top of all of that, it takes a significant amount of nutrients out of the soil. So Virginia is a good place to grow tobacco, and they quickly find that they're going to be able to grow a lot of it and make a lot of money off of it, but you're going to need a lot of land and you're going to need a lot of workers. So what to do about the land? Well, to encourage wealthier folks from England to come over and create the large farms that they would need to grow and make money selling tobacco, they created something called the headright system. And this headright system was responsible for the huge farms that started popping up throughout Virginia. Here's how it worked. The Virginia Company, which in the early years was in charge of running Jamestown and Virginia, offered settlers 50 acres of land for each person, each head, that he paid to bring over to Virginia. So for every person that you paid for, you would get 50 acres. So, for example, let's say you have a wealthy man in England. He pays for himself, his wife, their 3 children, and 3 indentured servants to come to Virginia. Well, that's 8 people. That's 8 heads. So the Virginia Company would grant him 8 times 50, or 400 acres. It's a pretty big farm. So what are the results of that? Well, for one, you had huge plantations like the one you see here in the picture, Shirley Plantation down along the James River. And these farms were massive. Lots of land to grow crops, particularly to grow tobacco. So you've got very, very big farms, and you're going to need more and more servants to work the land. You're also going to have settlers, because these farms are so huge, live spread out, right? There are going to be some towns and villages, but primarily settlers in Virginia tended to be very spread out, right? They didn't really live in close, tight-knit communities close together. So, quick recap. Virginia is really, once tobacco is introduced, it focuses on growing crops, primarily tobacco. It's focused on getting lots of land, lots of farmland to have the space. It's focused on a labor-intensive crop that's going to take a lot of work. And you have communities that develop pretty spread out from each other. Now for the response question for this set of notes, it's 2 parts. And this is totally opinion-based. What I want you to think about, in your own opinion, based on what it was like to live and work early on in the Virginia colony, past, after the starving time, where the colony is doing okay. You don't have to worry about, dying in the first year or 2 when you get there. Once they get past that, in your mind, what do you think would have been the best thing about living and working in Virginia and having these huge farms all spread out? The second part of the question is the opposite. In your mind, what would have been worst about that? What would have been the worst thing about living and working in Virginia with its tobacco economy and huge farms very spread out from each other? Totally opinion-based, but I want you to come up with a thoughtful answer of about a paragraph or so, really explaining why do you feel whatever you say is the best? Why is that the best part? Whatever you say is worst, why is that the worst part about it? Totally opinion-based, no right or wrong answers, but try to be specific and try to be detailed. Please print your notes before the next class.